The 1960s and 70s were a turbulent time for the civil rights movement. Although the 15th Amendment prohibited the state and federal governments from denying a citizen the right to vote based on that citizen's race, color, or previous condition of servitude, there were many white people who made it very difficult for black people to register. There was increasing pressure on the white people to let all black people register and vote, and a major movement in this effort was the Freedom Summer.
Freedom Summer took place in June of 1964. It was a campaign to register as many African Americans as possible in Mississippi. Mississippi was chosen as the place for this movement due to its historically low levels of African American voter registration. In 1962, less than 7% of eligible black voters registered to vote, which was the lowest percentage in the country. Mississippi was deeply segregated and was one of the hardest places for a black person to live in terms of civil rights.
The state of Mississippi made laws that made registering to vote very difficult for black people. The state's political leadership, controlled by the Segregationist Citizen Council, had been preventing blacks from registering to vote. The state had passed new voting laws to make registration even harder, and dependent on local officials who could register whites and reject blacks whenever they wanted. Black people were also intimidated, so they would decide against registering.
Freedom Summer was organized by SNCC and the Congress on Racial Equality and was comprised of black Mississippians and more than 1,000 out-of-state volunteers who were predominantly white. By bringing in volunteer white college students from the North to join them, the coalition scored a major public relations coup as hundreds of reporters came to Mississippi from around the country to cover the voter registration campaign. The Mississippi black population was unsure about the campaigns and whether or not it was safe to join in on the cause. Here's some footage of a SNCC worker discussing the attitudes of Mississippi's black population. The worker was trying to reach out for the voter registration campaign.
There's a big psychological gap to overcome. This what a lot of people call the psychology of fear. Most of the Negroes, they're afraid of losing their jobs. They've been brainwashed. They think that somehow all of this is the business of a white man, and it's not something that they're supposed to be doing.
Many activists tried to relate to the people of Mississippi. Here's a clip showing activists meeting with potential voters.
Try to meet them in a way that try to get in their environment, use their accent or the way they pronounce the words and things of this nature, to bring ourselves a little closer to them.
The people helping in the movement faced constant abuse and harassment from Mississippi's white population. The KKK, police, and even state and local authorities carried out a systematic series of violent attacks, including arson, beatings, false arrest, and the murder of at least 3 civil rights activists. Unita Blackwell, a voter registration worker, said, "People were threatened, folks were put in jail just because we wanted people to try to register to vote." Many white authority figures were completely against desegregation. Here is Mayor Charles Damon denouncing integration.
I think we had an incident provoked here by the people who have been in our community trying to stir up some, just agitating against, for a general integration thing, a movement that our local people have nothing to do with and don't want any part of. And I feel like the outsiders that came in here to talk our people into this thing did it.
The most famous act of violence was when 2 of the white volunteers from New York, Michael Schwerner and Andrew Goodman, and a local Afro-American, James Chaney, disappeared. On June 21st, Chaney, Goodman, and Schwerner set out to investigate a church bombing near Philadelphia, Mississippi, but were arrested that afternoon and held for several hours on alleged traffic violations. Their release from jail was the last time they were seen alive. Their bodies were discovered in a nearby dam 6 weeks later. Goodman and Schwerner had died from single gunshot wounds to the chest, and Chaney from a fatal beating. Many were certain that they had been murdered before their bodies were found because of their help with the cause. Many of the workers resented the lack of federal protection and the slowness of the investigation. Many black people were injured and hurt for no reason besides their race. Here is a woman describing how her house was invaded and her grandchild was wounded.
Well, on this past Monday night, a week ago, our house was fired in. Someone shot through the window several times, striking my granddaughter and her cousin and myself. They were shot up badly, but I got some of the pellets off the fan struck me in the arm. Well, I know that I'm a citizen of this country. I'm loyal to all the obligations that they're calling out of a citizen. I pay, we pay our tax. And I just know, and I was born and reared in Mississippi. And I'm a citizen of Mississippi.
The organization of the Mississippi Freedom Party, also known as the MFDP, was a major focus of the summer program. More than 80,000 Mississippians joined the new party. During a presidential election year, the MFDP delegation challenged the seating of the delegates representing Mississippi's all-white Democratic Party. The nation watched a televised hearing on August 22nd to determine which delegation would represent the state. The dramatic appeal from MFDP delegate Fannie Lou Hamer drew a lot of national attention.
All of this is on account of we want to register to become first-class citizens. And if the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off of the hook because our lives be threatened daily, because we want to live as decent human beings in America? Thank you.
But President Lyndon Johnson cut off television coverage to end the testimony and keep white Southerners in the party. The effort failed and the MFDP was not seated, but their presence and moral strength of their argument impacted national politics. The MFDP challenge also led to a ban on racially discriminatory delegations at future conventions.
Schools were segregated in Mississippi, but clearly not equal. Black schools lacked money and had to use hand-me-down textbooks that discussed American history in a racist way. A goal of some Freedom Summer officials was to make Mississippi's educational system racially equal. 30 freedom schools were created in order to accomplish this goal. White college students taught in these schools about Black history, the Civil Rights Movement, reading, and mathematics. During the first summer, the freedom schools recruited 3,000 students, many more than their original goal. These schools became a model for future social programs and educational institutions.
The events of the Freedom Summer made it more difficult for the people involved in the Civil Rights Movement to decide how to proceed in their efforts. The division deepened between those who believed in a nonviolent approach to equality and those who doubted whether racial equality was achievable by peaceful means. Overall, the Freedom Summer was not very successful in getting Black voters registered, but had a significant impact on the course of the Civil Rights Movement. The movement eventually led to the 1965 Voting Rights Act. The Freedom Summer gave African Americans a new confidence in political actions. Fannie Lou Hamer once said, "Before the 1964 project, there were people that wanted change, but they hadn't dared to come out. After 1964, people began moving. To me, it's one of the greatest things that ever happened in Mississippi."